In this video, we are going to describe different methods of recording grey fleet mileage to GHGi Analytics. Grey fleet is a term used to describe business mileage undertaken in a private vehicle, car, van or perhaps motorcycle. The UK government's Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting (SECR) legislation requires it to be declared in the transport section. Grey fleet mileage can be the most difficult data to get hold of, as it is usually recorded as out-of-pocket expenses. Extracting this information from an expenses system can be difficult, particularly if the expenses system is paper or spreadsheet based. We have provided 5 different options for collecting the data, each becoming progressively more accurate. After logging in, you get to the central console. In the navigation bar, we select Applications and in the drop-down, select Analytics. This takes us to the dashboard page, where we select Data Entry in the navigation bar and in the drop-down, select Travel. This in turn takes us to the Travel Distance Transaction page. Method 1. Cars only, dates and monetary totals. This is where the only information available from the expenses system is the sum paid out for mileage expenses in a specific period. This would normally be monthly, but quarterly or annual periods are possible. For analysis, it is best to enter data monthly. You enter the amount paid in mileage expenses to your employees in a given period. The system holds the company mileage rate, usually 45 pence a mile. This allows the system to calculate the number of miles paid for. As we do not know the size of car or even the fuel type, the system uses the government factors for average car and unknown fuel type to calculate emissions. All fields marked in red are required fields. The first field is the description field. In this case, I will enter grey fleet mileage March 2020. Next is the from date. We will enter 1st March 2020. This is followed by the to date, which will be 31st March 2020. In the total gross remuneration, GB pounds, we enter the amount reclaimed for the business mileage in that period defined above. We'll say £1,500. We can ignore the next 2 fields. You now have the ability to upload some sort of supporting documentation to support the auditing process. Then press Submit. This takes us to the grey fleet transaction page. It shows all the grey fleet transaction entries and details of the emissions, including well-to-tank emissions, WTT. This page is accessed from the report section on the navigation bar and by selecting transactions. We now move on to the next option. Method 2. Cars only, dates and distance. We use this method when the total distance claimed can be obtained from the expenses system, but not the vehicle size or fuel type. As we do not know the size of car or the fuel type, the system uses the government factors for average car and unknown fuel type to calculate the emissions. All fields marked in red are again required fields. The first field is the description field. In this case, I will enter grey fleet mileage February 2020. Next is the from date. We will enter 1st February 2020. This is followed by the to date, which will be the 29th of February 2020. We now enter the distance. Let's say the expenses system showed 1,850 miles were claimed, so we type in 1,850. In the units drop down below, we can either select miles or kilometres, but we will stick to the default, miles. As before, we ignore the next 2 fields. Again, you have the ability to upload some sort of supporting documentation to support the auditing process. Then you press Submit. This takes us to the Grey Fleet transaction page described before. We now move on to the third option. Method 3. Cars only, dates, distance and fuel type. We use this method when the total distance claimed and the fuel type can be obtained from the expenses system, but not the vehicle size. We do not know the size of the car, so the system uses average car from the government factors and then selects the appropriate fuel type to calculate the emissions. The fuel types available are diesel, petrol, LPG, CNG, which is compressed natural gas, hybrid electric diesel, hybrid electric petrol, plug-in hybrid electric diesel, plug-in hybrid electric petrol, and battery electric vehicle. You make an entry for each fuel type in turn. In the case of petrol, the system calculates the emissions based on the mileage provided and the average car using petrol. You then make another entry for the next fuel, which might be diesel. The system calculates the emissions for that fuel based on the mileage and, again, average car. All fields marked in red are required fields. The first field is the description field. In this case, I will enter Petrol, Grey Fleet, April 2020. Next is the from date. We will enter 1st April 2020. This is followed by the to date, which will be 30th April 2020. We now enter the distance. Let's say the expenses system showed 1,460 miles were claimed, so we type in 1,460. In the units drop-down below that, we can either select miles or kilometres, but we will stick with the default miles. Fuel type is next. We will select petrol. As before, we ignore the next two fields. Again, you have the ability to upload some sort of supporting documentation for the auditing process. Press Submit. This again takes us to the Grey Fleet transaction page. There are likely to be mileage claims for different fuel types, so adding a different fuel type for the same period will be common, which is what we will do now. In the description field, in this case, I will enter Hybrid Petrol, Grey Fleet, April 2020. Next is the from date. We will again enter 1st of April 2020, followed by the to date, 30th April 2020. Now we enter the distance. Not that many people have hybrid electric cars, so let's say the expenses system showed 90 miles were claimed. So we type in 90. In the units drop-down, we will leave it at miles. The fuel type is next. We will select hybrid electric petrol. As before, we ignore the next two fields. Again, we recommend that you upload some sort of supporting documentation for the auditing process. Press Submit, and this takes us to the Grey Fleet transaction page. You could have claims for more than two fuel types, so you repeat this process as often as required. Method 4. Dates, distance, fuel type, vehicle size. We need more information in this case. And this is the first option where we can separate out vehicles other than cars. The expenses system can tell us the total miles claimed by vehicle type, size of that vehicle, type and fuel type for that size and type of vehicle. The vehicle types available are car, motorcycle and van. For car, you have small car, medium car, large car and average. For motorcycle, you have small, medium, large and average. For van, you have Class 1, Class 2, Class 3, Class 4 and average. Fuel types available for cars are the same as before: diesel, petrol, LPG, CNG, hybrid electric diesel, hybrid electric petrol, plug-in hybrid electric diesel, plug-in hybrid electric petrol, and battery electric vehicle. Fuel types available for motorcycles is simply petrol. The UK government factors make no distinction between 4-stroke and the less used 2-stroke fuels. Fuel types available for vans are diesel, petrol, LPG, CNG, battery electric vehicle and unknown fuel type. You may make an entry for each vehicle type, size and fuel type in turn. In the first case, it might be the mileage claimed for all medium-sized petrol cars in a specific time period. The system calculates the emissions based on the total mileage entered and the medium-sized car using petrol. You then make another entry, which might be for all Class 3 diesel vans. The system calculates the emissions based on the total mileage entered and Class 3 vans using diesel. Remember, we used this section for privately owned vehicles used for business travel, not company-owned vans, cars or motorcycles. As before, all fields marked in red are required fields. The first field is the description field. In this case, I will enter petrol, medium car, grey fleet, January 2020. What you enter is actually up to you. Next is the from date. We will enter 1st January 2020. This is followed by the to date, which will be 31st January 2020. And then we enter the distance. Let's say the expenses system showed 1120 miles. So, for that claim, we will enter 1120. In the units drop-down, we can either select miles or kilometres, but we will stick to the default miles. The vehicle type is next. We click on the drop-down, where from the 3 vehicle types offered, we will select car. In car size, we will select medium car. Fuel type, in this drop-down, we will select petrol. As before, we will ignore the next 2 fields. Again, you have the ability to upload some sort of supporting documentation for use in the audit process. Press Submit. This again takes us to the grey fleet transaction page. Now, some of your staff may have their own vans or, more likely, pickups that are used occasionally for business travel. A Ford Ranger pickup or a VW Amarok pickup would fit into Class 3 van. So, in this case, I will enter diesel, Class 3 van, grey fleet, January 2020. Next is the from date. We will enter 1st January 2020, and this is followed by the to date, which will be the 31st of January 2020. We now enter the distance. Let's say the expenses system showed 910 miles were claimed, so we type in 910. In the units drop-down, we can either select miles or kilometres, but we will stick with the default miles. Vehicle type is next. We click on the drop-down where 3 vehicle types are offered. We will select van. Now, you will see that by selecting van, the names of the next 2 drop-downs change. Car size changes to van size, and fuel type changes to van fuel type. The contents also change. Under van size, you now have Class 1, Class 2, Class 3, Class 4 and average. We will select Class 3 for a pickup. In van fuel type, the options have also changed. It shows diesel, petrol, LPG, CNG, battery electric vehicle and unknown fuel type. We will select diesel. As before, we ignore the next two fields. Again, you have the ability to upload some sort of supporting documentation for use in the audit process. Again, we press Submit. This again takes us to the Grey Fleet transaction page. You must not think that to use this you need to have all the data for all the options. One example would be where you have information for car mileage split by fuel type and van mileage split by fuel type, but no details of the vehicle size. You would complete the first four fields as usual. Then, in the case of petrol cars, you would select Car under Vehicle Type, in Car Size, Average, and in Fuel Type, Petrol. In the case of van, you would select Van under Vehicle Type, in van size, average, and in fuel type, diesel. Method 5. Dates, distance, registration. This is the most accurate method for grey fleet emissions reporting. It involves loading GHGi Analytics with the details of the vehicles and their users. Where possible, the CO2 emissions in grams per kilometre figure for the vehicle concerned should also be included. This information is found on the vehicle's registration document, V5C. It can also be found on the DVLA website by putting in the vehicle registration number. The process for setting up vehicles is described in a separate video. Mileage claimed for each specific vehicle is added to the system. As before, all fields marked in red are required fields. The first field is the description field. As this record is for an individual vehicle, not the mileage claimants as a whole, I will enter Jack Wills, Grey Fleet, March 2020. Next is the from date. We will enter 1st March 2020. And this is followed by the to date, which will be 31st March 2020. We now enter the distance. Let's say the expenses system showed 183 miles were claimed by Jack, so we type in 183. In the units drop-down, we will stick with the default units, miles. We now select the car. Jack's car is GW20PIH. We ignore the next two fields. Again, you have the ability to upload some sort of supporting documentation for use in the audit process. Press Submit. This takes us to the Grey Fleet transaction page. I previously stated that the travel distance transaction section was for privately owned vehicles only. This is true for methods 1 to 4. However, there are situations in which method 5 would be used for company-owned or leased vehicles. Some organisations provide company cars to certain staff members, but do not pay for the fuel. In these cases, the employee pays for their fuel and then claims back business travel mileage through the expenses system. Method 5 would be used in this case. There are more details about this in a separate video. These are the 5 methods available to you, but do not assume that you will need only one of them. Our experience has shown that for organisations with multiple sites, the depth of information available can vary substantially. In these cases, expect to use more than one method. The system can easily cope with this. Thank you for watching.